When I was your age, if someone would have asked me who my neighbor was, I would have responded with the names Kurt and Joyce. Kurt and Joyce were an elderly couple who I lived next to my whole life growing up. Now keep in mind that I grew up with my three brothers and we weren't always the most well-behaved kids. In fact, there was rarely a time when we weren't getting into trouble, and we had a few run-ins with Kurt and Joyce to say the least. We were constantly hitting their house with balls, making way too much noise way too late, leaving things in their yards, and even the occasional broken window. I can remember every time that we were out running around, Joyce would poke her head through her little kitchen window just to see what we were up to. And the funny thing is, though for as mean as we thought they were growing up, looking back I can see that they really just cared about if we were being safe. So how many of you have ever asked yourselves the question, who is my neighbor? Now that probably sounds like a pretty weird question, right? Well, believe it or not, the story that we're going to be discussing these past 3 weeks about the Good Samaritan was told because Jesus was asked the question, who is my neighbor? At first glance, this may sound like a really strange response to that question, but Jesus had a really special purpose behind it. Jesus wanted the person asking the question, who is this expert in the law, to realize that anyone and everyone that they came across who was in need was their neighbor. Jesus already said that to inherit eternal life, they must simply love God with everything they have and love their neighbor as themselves. So how do we learn to love our neighbor, who we already said is anyone in need, as ourselves? The answer to that question, I believe, is found in changing from a me mentality to a we mentality. Let's talk a little bit about what a me mentality looks like. To start, it looks like someone who's more concerned with what people think about them rather than how they treat other people. A me mentality also looks like someone who is willing to like an anti-bullying post on Facebook, but when it comes to standing up for someone in school, they'd rather stay quiet. Now, if that's what a me mentality looks like, then what does a we mentality look like? The answer to that question is found in Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, and it says, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The life of Jesus is filled with examples of him completely shocking people by breaking the rules of his time and serving those who were considered lower than him. One of the greatest examples of Jesus serving others is when he washed the feet of his disciples, which was actually a task reserved only for the lowest servant or the slave of the house. Now, unless you have a thing against feet and you think they're really gross, then you may be thinking, well, washing somebody's feet really isn't that bad. But the feet during Jesus' time were a lot different from our feet now. You know when you wear sandals all day and your feet get kind of dirty? Well, imagine wearing sandals at a farm where there's dirt and thorns and animal poop everywhere. And then you'll start to get an idea of what people's feet were like during Jesus' time. But even more than all of that, let me tell you the part of that story that really gets me. This feet washing took place at what we call the Last Supper. And that's pretty much the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples before he was arrested and crucified. And just a little before we read about the feet washing, there's this verse that tells us that the devil had tempted Judas to betray Jesus. And shortly after the feet washing, Jesus would predict his betrayal. However, that means that Jesus knowingly got down and cleaned the dirt and the filth from the feet of the one who would send him to his death. How many of you have someone that you would call your enemy, or at least someone you would purposely go out of your way to avoid? Would you dare to serve them in the most low and degrading way? Because if you're a Christ follower, that's what you are called to do. What would a we mentality look like in your life? How would your school look differently if you had a we mentality? Or even what would our StuCo look like if we all had we mentalities? Maybe then people who are hurting and broken would have somewhere they felt like they could go for help. Maybe then students wouldn't feel like ending their life was the only answer. Maybe then students would begin finding their way back to God. Where is God calling you to serve and put others before yourself? What about the kid who you know doesn't have a lot of friends and could really use someone to talk to during lunch? Or what about the kid who always gets picked last or left out of the games that everyone else is playing? Do you care enough about them to risk what other people think about you? Because those are your neighbors, and those are the people we are commanded to love as ourselves. And the thing about a we mentality is that it's contagious. While it starts with just one person, it doesn't end there. When we start focusing on others and putting them before ourselves, we see lives changed. When someone has their life changed, then they too can go from a me mentality to a we mentality. And Wally's story doesn't end where we left it. Let's see what happened when he changed his me mentality to a we mentality.